right, welcome back to another episode of Resident Skeptics. Now, as you can see or as you can hear, Connor's not here with us today. No worries, he will be back next week. But today we're going to talk about what is on everyone's mind and is in what's in everybody's inbox, in everybody's advertisements, in everybody's Twitter feed, your Instagram feed, everything. And that is the holy month of Pride. Yes, we have to talk about it. There is a lot to uncover. We might even end up talking about some other topics, but of course, we have to talk about Pride Month. And I'm actually very excited about Pride Month this time around. I'm normally not. I normally dread it. I find it to be, pretty obnoxious. Overall, it's just a lot of almost like a throwing up of the rainbow is kind of what it feels like. But we're gonna dive into it a little bit more. The reason why I'm particularly excited about it is because we're starting to see some actual resistance from the conservative movement. So I just kind of want to back us up a little bit here. I want to back us up here, not just to Pride Month, but actually the legalization of gay marriage, which I believe, and I'm going to actually double check here and make sure that I'm correct. Yes, it seems that it was in 2015, June 26, 2015, is when the Supreme Court they made same-sex marriage legal, and this was with the Obergefell v. Hodges ruling. And so that is how we have now the legalization of gay marriage, and I feel like that is kind of the starting point to how this almost became so big. Now, I made a crucial mistake, I feel like, in the beginning of my political shaping of beliefs, so to speak. So I'm a devout Christian. So religiously, I am against, gay marriage. I'm against the idea of homosexuality as well, by the way. And I want to add this because most people don't add this against the idea of sexual immorality. Yes, those two are put into a very equal spot if we see in scripture both sexual immorality and homosexuality, along with a list of other sins that are habitually practiced, they do not allow us to be close to God in the sense of actual permanent separation. So that's another topic in itself. But I kind of at one point it was very cool and very hip to take a libertarian stance on gay marriage in the sense of religiously, I believe this to be wrong, but hey, if you want to get married, if you want to do that and leave me alone, that's fine, right? So that was kind of the whole idea of being more libertarian on gay marriage, so to speak. And I'll kind of explain why this was an error in my mind and how it's sort of played out. So the whole idea of this is that if you're libertarian on this, it's like, okay, I leave you alone, you leave me alone, and we are good to go. And don't bother me. And so I think there are definitely some people, that live that lifestyle that have held up to that promise of, okay, we will leave you alone. However, there is, whether it is a small minority of loud people or it's actually a big group in itself, I'm not 100% sure yet. They have decided that this is not possible. This is not possible. They're going to break their promise and say, we aren't actually going to leave you alone. In fact, what we're going to do is we are going to force you to join in on this idea with us. And if you choose not to, we will ostracize you. We will try to find ways to take away your job if you don't agree. And this comes more in the terms of, inclusion in the workplace, all those different things. You can't speak out about any of these things. You can't have your own beliefs on it, which you should be able to. It's America, and we'll make your life hard and we'll make it socially unacceptable for you to have anything to say against these ideas. And so a lot of that came in with this idea of Pride Month. And by the way, I'm going to also get into a little bit how this isn't just about the LG part of the LGBTQ movement or LMNOP. They've added so many letters. I'm talking a lot about how this has not only stretched just with that section of sexuality, but also into transgenderism. And not just into transgenderism. but also into trying to get children on board of this narrative and kind of soak them in this ideology, as well as actually trying to get kids to be trans themselves or trying to get them to be confused about their sexuality, which is something that we're gonna start unpacking a little bit as well. But again, as I was saying, it kind of moved into this idea of Pride Month where we have all these different products, we have all these different, diversity things, you see, the shirts and, the pride parades. And as we've kind of continued on in the years, we've noticed there to be some significant changes. One of the bigger significant changes that we've seen, as I've just mentioned, is this idea that kids are to be involved in this sexualization process. So not only are they not going to leave you alone if you don't agree with this narrative, but they're not going to leave your kids alone either. So there's a couple different ways that this happens, and these are two a little bit different scenarios. You do have some parents, which I have some thoughts on, who will take their children to these pride parades and expose them to a lot of interesting things. In fact, in Charlotte, North Carolina, we did have a viral clip of a child uh, pole dancing with this dancer. It was deeply disturbing. This dancer was wearing next to nothing. Wish I had the clip to pull up and show you guys. But there's one thing. So they're taking kids to these sexualized events because it is sexualized, especially if you're talking about specific sexual orientation, which for these pride parades, it's typically lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, like those are specifically have to do with sexuality. So that's the first thing. The second thing gets to a much bigger population of kids. And this is what I want to talk about, which is why I'm excited about Pride Month, is because we're seeing a little bit of pushback. So Target decided that they were going to make these tuck friendly bathing suits, essentially for children that want to express their gender identity by it's even too disturbing to say, but tucking certain areas as to appear a certain way, which is disturbing in itself. Now, even last year, there's also reports of the chest binders as well at Target. And if you know anything about chest binding itself, if you do a little bit more research into it, when you chest bind, some of the things that can actually happen, especially for women, is that your chest is not meant to be restricted in that way. It can actually really damage your rib cage. So not only is this affirming a specific type of gender identity that they are not. Girls are not that. Girls are not boys. Boys are not girls. But it also physically damages them. As far as I know, the damage is permanent. But Target has been known to do a lot of these things. But specifically with these tuck friendly bathing suits, somehow this did the trick. This was the thing that made people upset, because I'm actually looking at some reports here, and this one is by the New York Post. If you want me to, I can put it down in the description below. But it's just basically saying that Target's stocks have lost 13.8 billion. This is as of May 31st. And this is the lowest apparently since the 2020 boycotts. Let me just go ahead and just read a little bit from the article. So that Target stock has lost a whopping 13.8 billion over the past 2 weeks, hitting its lowest levels in nearly 3 years as the cheap chic discount retailer continues to face backlash over LGBTQ plus friendly kids clothing. Shares of the embattled chain sank 2.2% at $130.93 on Wednesday after dropping for 8 straight sessions, the stock's longest losing streak since November 2018, giving the company a market capitalization of 60.4 billion. That's off 19% from 2 weeks earlier on May 18th when the stock was trading at $160 dollars and 96 cents on the eve of the crisis. It's also the lowest levels Target shares have hit since the company was recovering from the depths of the pandemic in the mid 2020. The ongoing losses are a result of an ongoing 14-day boycott that was triggered by Target's release of Pride, an LGBTQ plus friendly line that includes clothes for children and tuck friendly women's swimwear with extra crotch coverage. So I did get one little detail wrong there. I suppose this is tuck friendly wear for women, and then LGBTQ G. Oof, this is why there's too many letters. LGBTQ plus clothing for children, which, as far as I know, they also did hire like some sort of Satanist graphic designer for that, and that's a whole another thing. But essentially, this was kind of the turning point for a lot of people. But I actually think that this was the second turning point, because this Target boycott was on top of the success of the Bud Light boycott, which I'm also going to look here and make sure that I'm getting this right. Yes. Okay. So Bud Light has lost $27 billion since the Dylan Mulvaney incident, which is basically when they paid Dylan Mulvaney to talk about Bud Light and do his little act of being a ditzy little girl that doesn't know anything about sports and whatnot, and then they also made him a can that had his face on it, and so this made people pretty upset. Now, I'm saying people in general, but I actually want to specify this a little bit more. Um, the people that I feel like actually started this boycott were not women. It's men. Men started this boycott. And I guess this was a triggering point is two things, which I think is really interesting. The first thing is the erasure of women, because that's what Dylan Mulvaney is. That's what people have been complaining about, but haven't been willing to do anything about it. Um, and you know this, and I'm all over the place, but I'm gonna try to come back here a little bit. Is that Dylan Mulvaney did a whole podcast on Alta, and this was maybe about a year or so ago, talking about being a woman. It was beyond insulting for women. But did Alta's stock really drop a ton? It didn't. It didn't really make the news because as much as you might have conservative women or even moderate women that find it disgusting, they're still like, oh, well, we're still going to go get our cosmetics and we're still going to go get our things. However, when it happens in a market that's more male dominated, like Bud Light, suddenly you have a bunch of men that are like, oh, heck no, we're not doing this at all. We're going to stop. Now, I might be labeled as sexist for saying this, but I think that there's actually some truth to it. Is that I think men in their quote unquote lack of compassion really make things happen. They do. Women are often a little bit too nice, where sometimes you need a little bit of that harshness that says, no, this isn't okay. And we're going to show you that it's not okay. And so that's what you actually saw with Bud Light, is you had primarily men saying, we're not okay. Even if women are okay with the erasure of women, we are not okay with the erasure of women. And we are going to show our lack of support for this. And so that almost was, in my opinion, the catalyst that said, hey, we can do this too. Because you think about it. Now look at a place like Target. Yes, you do have both men and women shopping at Target, but still primarily, in my opinion, as far as I can see, at least when I go to the grocery store, a lot of women still go to the grocery store and they say, well, shoot, I don't want to shop at Target anymore. If we can do this with Bud Light, we can do this with Target. And so the bravery, in my opinion at least, the bravery of men in Bud Light, and yes, a small minority of women who also drink Bud Light, led a movement that said, "Hey, we can all do this together." And so, do I think Target will have the exact same effect as Bud Light? I don't think that it will. I don't think that it will. And I think one of the biggest reasons why we might not be seeing that in the same way is because Target covers a much larger market. Obviously, Target has everything from clothes to makeup to groceries to cleaning supplies, and the list kind of goes on. Bud Light is a little bit more narrowed down. It's a much smaller market. You're only looking at beer, and so there are plenty of easier ways to get alternative options. But I still think that this is a great stride, not just for conservatives, but for anyone who is against the idea of trying to trans the kids, so to speak, or sexually indoctrinate them. this is a truly sick society that decides that we need to mainstream small children, and I'm talking real young, you know, try to indoctrinate them into understanding sexuality. Most of us growing up, sex was not something that we immediately talked about when we were 3 years old. It's a conversation that ended up happening as you get older. You start, you know, being more understanding of those things, and your parents help you along in those ways. But it was never something that was on the forethought of everybody, whether it's, in the clothing market, right, for small children, or whether it's teachers that feel that it is their right and it is their obligation to make your children in school systems aware of their sexuality, and they feel the need to be celebrated by these kids. That's pretty narcissistic. And when I say sick, I mean genuinely mentally sick, to do that to kids. And I think that we have conservatives, and I think even classical liberals as well, are starting to catch on to the idea that this goes beyond just you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. Pride Month is not about leaving anybody alone. Pride Month is trying to constantly force you to try to embrace an ideology that's not only coming for you, but is also coming for your children, as well. And I think what we're seeing here with Bud Light and Target is a fantastic start to Pride Month, because it shows that there's people that say, "Hey, this really isn't okay. It's not okay for you to push this kind of stuff on our kids." And I hope, that these companies are able to, think twice about these ideas, because remember, with these companies, this is still a capitalist society. If these types of things are consistently losing them money, guess what? They're still money driven. There's still a possibility, that they're willing to change their stance on things, or remain neutral. To be honest, I'm ignorant in this area where I don't know if we've gotten past the idea of having just a neutral, politically neutral company. I wish companies would be politically neutral. I don't think that an Oreo needs to have an opinion on trans rights. I don't think that a company needs to make a political statement. I just want them to, sell me my cucumbers, and my milk and my cleaning supplies. But we have perhaps gotten past this, and I think a lot of it is because you do have the woke mob, pressuring these companies to say these things. So these companies are stuck in a really hard spot of, do we appease the woke mob or lose money? And I think if they start to see how much more people are on board of just a neutral company, and when I think of neutral company, so for example, something that's different from Target, at least in North Carolina, we have this thing called Harris Teeter, which is essentially, a chain small-ish grocery store, which, as far as I know, even if they have some political views, it's not really that well known. They're just a grocery store. You could just go get your stuff there. If they start to see that stores like that are doing better and they're losing money, and they see that there's a lot of interest in just being neutral, they might go back to that baseline. Um, but this does go back to how I started the episode of talking about this idea of, if you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. And it's time for us, I hope that we understand that it's time for us to get past this mindset, that they're just not going to allow you to have your own personal beliefs without forcing you to try to parrot whatever they believe. It's time to take a stand. There are values that are good, and there are ideas that are morally corrupt. That if you don't stop it, if you continue to take a libertarian stance on everything, our country is going to erode. And we have, as a nation, we have an obligation to figure out what those values are. And Pride Month is just a symptom of that, of the idea. Again, we talk about in this podcast a lot how important the nuclear family is. And when there's a legalization of gay marriage, as much as I think some of these people are good intentioned and want to be left alone, a proper marriage between a man and a woman, historically speaking, is the nucleus of society. And without us being able to maintain marriage, true marriage between a man and a woman, that society starts to break down. And you see that with what's going on with the transgender issue of what's happening with these kids, with this irreversible damage. You see what happens even too in certain ethnic communities where there's single motherhood rates. Um, and they're relying on the government. That's a breaking of the nuclear family. And so I hope um, with this Pride Month that you will be encouraged, that you'll be able to hopefully find people to have meaningful discussions with about this idea. That you find other places to shop besides Target, or in regards to your beer choices or your alcohol choices, they are able to find alternative. Public Square, we always shout them out because they are a good parallel economy option. There's a lot of great shops that you can look at there. I've gotten a lot of great things there myself. For example, you have a brand like Aerie that, of course, they have their whole Pride thing as well, and a lot of people like to get their bathing suits from there. I got my really cute bathing suit from Public Square, and it's different, obviously, because 'cause I'm not just buying the same Aerie swimsuit that everybody else is. I'm buying something that's a little bit different, and it's around the same price. So, it's a win overall. Another thing I did wanna mention as well is the idea of, an ESG score. And I'm actually still looking into this myself, but there are different types of ESG scores, and I actually need to go ahead and look here. And basically, your ESG score, it can do with a couple of different topics for a brand. And that brand, it can be issue specific ESG scores. Um, like looking at different issues. I'm actually looking at a specific article here that's giving an example of like a water risk rating um, for a singular issue, and then you have category specific issues. And a lot of it can do with environmental or social justice or governance. And so, you have these companies that want to try to increase their ESG score. And so, a lot of the big quote unquote, specific ESG issues are, you guessed it, things like LGBTQ rights. You have ideas of like climate change. I'm trying to think of some other things I guess people really care about, but I think those are the two that I hear about the most. But I feel like there are some good things like cancer research, things of those nature as well. And so you have to understand too is that these companies are also trying to bring up their ESG score as well. So worth looking into. Again, I don't have a ton of information on it, but just a little bit as another extra. Well, not just an extra component. It is as a main component there, but something to look at as well. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to another topic that has a little less to do with Pride Month, but I still feel like it's a good topic nonetheless. We do need to talk about the Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump situation. So, as you guys know, Ron DeSantis announced on Twitter, which is a very interesting choice, that he is going to be running for president in 2024, directly opposing Donald Trump. Now, I say directly opposing. Yes, there are other people that have put their hat in the ring. You have Vivek, who's put his hat in the ring. Excuse me. You have Mike Pence as well. I want to say there's a couple other people. Yes, right, Nikki Haley. Again, people that maybe Vivek is a good candidate. Nikki Haley is, I don't know, she seems like more of a milk toasty kind of Republican to me, but people still seem to like them okay. But we all know that they're not going to get anywhere. We even know that Ron DeSantis doesn't have like the 100% best chance. So Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis, I actually sat down. I asked my dad today. I said, okay, so for the Republican nomination, if it's between Ron DeSantis and Trump today, who gets that nomination? And he said, and I have a tendency to agree, that Trump still is going to have that nomination. I think you still have a lot of people that are loyal to Trump. He does bring about a certain level of tribalism that Trump he can do absolutely no wrong. He can do no wrong. And I think that this is a deeply, um, what's the best word for this? I feel like it is idolization at its finest, of willing to ignore all of Trump's flaws, um, for the sake that Trump is just the best thing that's ever happened. Now, granted, he was a great president. He did a good job, and also a thing to remember as well um, with these certain presidents is that they also have people in their administration that do a fantastic job for them. Trump had great people in his administration that I think made great foreign policy. I also think that he made some pretty big mistakes as well. I think what happened with COVID and Fauci is something that I think Ron DeSantis is going to attack as a weak point for Trump, which I think is fair. I think that you have a lot of the riots in 2020 where he didn't deploy the National Guard like he should have. And lastly, as well, you also have the 2020 election where he encouraged people not to vote, and we ended up losing 2 Senate seats in Georgia. So I think DeSantis definitely has a line of attack in that regard. Trump, he has some legitimate ways that he could attack DeSantis. He could attack DeSantis in the fact that he's never really dealt with a lot of foreign policy. I think that's a big thing because I think that's one of the bigger wins that Trump ever had, was in his foreign policy. And so I think that Trump could definitely attack DeSantis in that way as well, and just basically saying he doesn't have the same type of experience, he doesn't have the same type of track record on a national level that he does. DeSantis has only managed a smaller state, so I think that could be a line of attack that Trump does make. What Trump has done, though, has been pretty much, in my opinion, it's just so bad. It's so bad, where he's come across as a child. He calls on Truth Social, he calls DeSantis Rob, DeSanctimonious, basically using the type of nicknames that our 8-year-old children would use for kids that they don't like, on the playground, right? That's the type of stuff that Trump is doing. He's also defending Disney to a certain extent, where it's like, wait a minute, like this is a really bad line of attack. Like there are ways that you could go after DeSantis, but because Trump is such an egomaniac, he is not going to think rationally. And that's the thing that I don't think people understand about Trump is that 2016 Trump is the same Trump that we have now in 2023. As much as he did some great stuff for our country, the guy is still an egomaniac, right? The guy still is looking out for himself. I do think he cares about America. I do think that, but I think two things can be true at once. He cares about America, but he also cares about his hand in that and the praise that he can get. And the idea of anyone else potentially taking the reins and trying to help, that to him is not acceptable. And I think what also doesn't help is that he lost the 2020 election. Listen, whether you thought it was rigged, whether you thought what it wasn't, in the eyes of everyone, Joe Biden is still the president of the United States, and he still feels like he has something to prove. And so his pride is really been taken down, and DeSantis is in his way. Um, Again, do I think DeSantis will get the nomination? I don't know. I think that he could. Do I still think Trump has that lead on him? I do. Do I want Trump to have that lead on him? Not necessarily. So some stuff to take into consideration today. This was a fun episode. Let me know what your thoughts are on the idea of Pride Month, how you think the boycotts are going. Let us know what you think about Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, who you think is going to take it away, who you think won't, or if it's just too soon to tell. Let us know in the comments, or you can email us as well. We will be back next week with a brand new episode. Thank you so much for joining me for this short segment. Connor will be back, and you can also messages and let us know how much you missed him, because I know I did. I'm sure at the end of the month we'll have to do another episode with us just talking about how Pride Month went in general for conservatives and some of the really great wins that are in there. All right, that's all I have for today. Enjoy the rest of your week.